a second. There we go. I think we are live from ICA 17 in San Diego, California. Sounds like it's very beautiful there. I'm Ken Bauer, your virtual buddy for this session, and I will let Onsite start with Anne and introduce everybody on there.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Anne, and I'm here at ICA 17, as Ken said, in San Diego. I am the digital scholar at Whittier College, and I'm an on-site buddy. I'm here with Micha Cárdenas and Leah Komen, who are two of our plenary speakers. Micha spoke last night at the opening plenary, and Leah will be in the closing plenary. I'll let them introduce themselves and talk about what they will be speaking about, or have spoken about.
Great, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks to everyone who's virtually here. I am assistant professor of interdisciplinary arts and sciences. I teach at University of Washington at the Bothell campus, which is near Seattle. I teach interactive media design and gender, women's studies, and cultural studies. And I'm also an artist theorist. So last night I did a kind of combination of spending half my time with a sketch of ideas about the border as an algorithm, and then half the time on media projects and interventions.
Hi everyone, my name is Leah Komen. I'm from Daystar University in Kenya. This is where the ICA regional conference was held. So clearly this is a good thing for me. I teach development communication over there. I will be talking about learning, which is like mobile learning, and trying to see whether we can tap into the mobile technology for pedagogy. Right now we have a huge penetration. Everybody has a mobile phone, for example, and therefore, can we tap into this first thing and use it for pedagogy? So much so that if for some reason our students are caught up anywhere, can they be able to catch up with anything? I'll just be giving stories from Africa, really. It's going to be a conversation. Part of the things that I was told by Paula is really, there's a lot that needs to be told about Africa. So I'm going to be talking about Africa. Yeah, that's me.
Great.
Cool. Well, that's us here. This is my first time at ICA. Been before?
I know, it's my first time also.
It is my first to Mexico after the regional.
Okay, and I'm Maha Bailey. I'm Maha Bailey from the American University in Cairo in Egypt, and I'm the co-founder of Virtually Connecting. And I'm also on the closing plenary with Leah and I couldn't make it because they told me a little bit too late for me to organize my life to get there. So I'm here virtually connecting, and I'll be there virtually on Monday, inshallah, on the closing plenary, probably talking about virtually connecting. Hopefully at the time. There are a lot of people who signed up to be on this session to talk to you guys. We're not really sure where they are. Rachel, who did log in, had to go do something and come back, so she already told us to do that. But there are a few more people who might trickle in as we go on. But yeah, I also wanted to give Anne a chance to tell us what she's going to talk about, and then I would love to hear a little bit more about what Micha and Leah have already started to tell us. So, Anne, do you want to tell us what you're going to be talking about?
Sure. So I'll be talking about the kind of staff side of supporting digital pedagogy. I work in a library where I'm kind of this hybrid faculty staff person. And I'm at a small liberal arts college that, even though it's in Los Angeles, has a lot of infrastructure issues. So how do you teach digital pedagogy when we don't have like Wi-Fi penetration, for example? So I think that the mobile technology will actually be significant in our context as well. But I'll also be talking about FemTechNet and the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Pedagogy Workbook, and some of the resources that we've been putting together for digital and media pedagogies. Yeah. Trying to think of other things, but yes, that's what I'll be talking about.
So Micha, can you tell us a little bit more about what you started to tell us, like what you were talking about? You said half of it was, I was focusing when you said it, but I just forgot right now, but I wanna listen more.
Yeah, great. So I'll say a little bit about what I shared last night in the plenary, since apparently maybe some people couldn't access it. And so I wanted to share some new thoughts about the border and algorithmic analysis, or thinking about the border as an algorithm. So I've written a couple articles about trying to extend assemblage theory from Jes-Ripoire, which extends intersectional analysis, trying to extend that into thinking about algorithms, or using algorithms as a mode of analysis. So in the talk, I talked a little bit about Deleuze and Guattari's definition of assemblage as an entity that has multiple heterogeneous parts, and that it's a way of thinking about more than two elements of an intersectional analysis. For sure, we could do with intersectionality, but also think about each of those parts as having parameters and having sub-assemblages. So part of why I think algorithms are useful is because I find the image of assemblage in my head to be like a spinning ball of spaghetti with each spaghetti string spinning around. And it's not the most useful image to me to try to mentally capture something. And so Jes-Ripoire is this queer of color theorist who's proposed assemblage theory as a way to extend intersectionality. And she points us to the fact that the French word assemblage actually was what represented a collage. So a collage is actually a useful mental image to me. But still, Dewars trying to think about each element in the collage as like moving over time and in process. So it's kind of like a digital collage, or like a pulsing collage. Anyway, so I started looking at some articles about the border as an assemblage, and oftentimes these articles talk about algorithms as one part of the assemblage. So I basically so the articles that I was looking at in particular were this article by Christophe Sohn, who's a researcher at the Luxembourg Institute of Socioeconomic Research, who has an article called Navigating Borders Multiplicity. But also in Assemblage Theory by Manuel de Landa, they both talk about algorithms as part of assemblage. But I think that Deleuze and Guattari were not coders, and we're thinking about calculus as high tech, and that's cool, that's fine. But I think we have different tools now that might help us have more access to different ways of having mental figures to analyze things. So an algorithm, I think actually that every assemblage has an organizing logic. So instead of thinking about algorithm as part of the assemblage of the border, we can think about the fact that we can think of the border as an algorithm that organizes all of these parts of the assemblage. And so an algorithm is actually just a list of parts and a list of instructions. And so when I look at like Jes-Ripoire's writing about the border as an algorithm, for example, she talks about a lot of these like digital border or smart border efforts like Sentry or Nexus, or all of these databases like TSA PreCheck. And thinking about the border as something, of course, that extends much farther than its geographical bounds, but to be everywhere across the country or across the world. And I find that useful. And one of the questions that came up last night was asking about how Gloria Anzaldúa helps us think about this. And I said, I think Anzaldúa's writing is already prefiguring a lot of these things. I mean, Anzaldúa talks about borderlands as any space where two cultures meet. So in one hand, she's thinking about the borderlands as a site of knowledge production, but she's also thinking about the way the border is everywhere already. And she's thinking about the border as multi-layered and in process. And I think the algorithms also help us do that. And I wasn't really keeping track of time, but I'm trying to be brief.
I do want to say it was really great being at a conference that started with this really amazing plenary of all women academics doing like badass medical work. I don't think we come to many media is more likely to have this, but like communications is not really a field where we see a lot of that happening. So that was great.
Thanks. Yeah, man. I want to agree
Well,
with
they did
that.
a really good job because both. Oh, there's an echo. Sorry. But both the opening and closing plenaries were full of women and people of color, so I'm very impressed with that. So that's good. That is really interesting stuff that Misha just shared. My mind is exploding in all different directions about that.
Not just about women, you know, it's not just having women. It is a substance that they brought to the table.
Yeah,
and
of course.
That's lacking it. And so, yeah, that was good.
Tell us about some of the other things. Tell us about the other things that have been interesting so far. Benjamin has joined us. Benjamin, do you want to just say hi and say where you are?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? Great. My name is Benjamin Dockstader. I teach at the International School of Brussels. I work with middle school students and I teach English literature. And so a lot of what I do with them is things to do with media literacy, critical media literacy, looking at how being online can be both empowering, but also can make students vulnerable, and sort of how to navigate that as somebody in middle school.
And Kim Fox has also just joined us. Hi, Kim.
Hey guys, sorry for being late.
Could you introduce yourself quickly? We're in the middle of conversation, but introduce yourself anyway.
Kim Fox, I work with Maha at American University in Cairo.
And
in journalism.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's why I invited her. Okay, so we were, Misha just told us a little bit about what she talked about in the opening plenary, and we were just about to talk about some of the other stuff that was talked about at the opening plenary and in the conference as a whole. So can you tell us a little bit more? We started yesterday, right? So this is the second day of the conference? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what else is notable?
Instagram project. It sounds like something that might be helpful for these students in Brussels.
Great, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so for the second half of the talk, I tried to present some of my artwork and specific interventions. One of them was the Transborder Immigrant Tool, which is a cell phone app to help migrant people find water when they're crossing the border. But then I talked about some recent work. So I've recently been doing a lot of work on Instagram, partly to try to get people off of Facebook, partly because I want to be off of Facebook. You know, thinking about digital security. So I think thinking about the border as an algorithm helps me to think about all of the algorithmic kinds of surveillance that we face that are part of law enforcement, that are part of our everyday life now. So, so I've been working on this project called Hold Your Boundaries, and it's at instagram.com/holdyourboundaries or holdyourboundaries.com also. And basically what I've been trying to do is like take digital security information and make it more accessible to all the communities that are targeted by our unelected administration. So trans people, immigrants, people of color, women. And there's some really great, I feel like there's some really great efforts already to make those things accessible, like the DIY Guide to Feminist Cybersecurity, but that those resources are still overwhelming for a lot of people like in my community. So instead what I want to do is make short poems that contain security information and put them into an Instagram post so that they could be shared and that they would look good and people would want to talk about them with their friends, and so that we can think about security, digital security, not in this like capitalist, individualist, victim blaming way, but instead to think about it that we can be safe together as it's a community process and it's a community responsibility. So, you know, and also things are rapidly changing. So one of the things I mentioned in the plenary is that like recently border agents at the US border agents have been forcing people to hand over their social media login and password in order to enter the country. So that effectively makes Facebook just a database for the INS. And one of our posts on Hold Your Boundaries encourages people to don't post anything on social media that you don't want to talk to the police about or talk to ICE about, because you might have to hand it over to them. Even if you think it's private, even if all your settings are private, it's still totally accessible by law enforcement. And also
but it's not just what you post, right? It's who you know and who you're connected to. I mean, here's one of the things about algorithms that I've been thinking about, because I just got my US visa recently, and I had a problem with my fingerprint, and it's a huge story. But anyway, but the point is, I keep imagining that what is the likelihood that there's someone I know who knows someone who is a terrorist? And I think, what's the algorithm's going to see? What is the algorithm going to look at what I wrote 5 years ago when such and such politics was happening, or is it going to look at what I liked? And that's a problem for me locally. So like I'm sure there's local surveillance over here in Egypt, but then also that, and I love this idea of writing short poems that are accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm imagining if I could have my students look at those next semester, and I don't know if it's crowdsourced and if students can create some as a class or as pairs or something. Is that how it's working, or is it stuff that you guys are doing?
I was going to add there, Maha, that it's also not who you know now, but it's people have changed in your Facebook friends list. And actually, a friend of mine just realized that there was a Nazi sympathizer on his list of friends, but the algorithm never showed that in his Facebook feed because it wasn't agreeing with his views on things. So even though he was related to the person via a friendship, other people are seeing that angle of him, whether he wants to or not. So we got to be really careful on how our visibility is to not just ourselves, but everyone outside of ourselves in Facebook and other algorithms.
Which also then takes me back to the point about mobile learning, which I totally understand in our part of the world is a really big deal, because it is the device that's accessible to almost everyone. But then again, in another way, a mobile is a surveillance device that you take on with you everywhere. Like, you don't need to invite people over to bug your home. You're taking everything with you everywhere you go. And one of the reasons I'm not on Instagram is I worry about that as well. But I mean, everything we use does that. So I'm curious what you guys think about this as well.
Yeah, as you mentioned it, obviously, mobile phone is it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it applauds you, and another one, it crashes you. So I guess it's a question of looking at the risks therein and trying to imagine that which one would you rather work with. I mean, life itself is a risk. Sitting here is a risk in itself. So I guess, yes, there's an element of how much of my info is out there. Do we double check before we press the button? Most often than not, we don't. And it is the more, for example, one of the things that I will be talking about is, of course, the apps that you're most likely to use in a mobile phone. Think about the social media apps, WhatsApp and Facebook specifically. But when you think about what you're posting out there, you regularly post to. Chances are when you've prepared something to press, you'll send to the same person. So of course there's a risk of sending wrong information to the wrong group. And then it will not be, of course there's a right of reply, but it won't change matters. It's already gone. And before you realize it's a viral. And so, yeah, there's that danger. But on the other hand, you also want to look at it as something that could help, especially with students who, for some reason, cannot make it for a physical one-on-one class, but also even for those who cannot do the smartphone, do they have like a group email just in case there's, the internet as it fluctuates, which is a common problem in Africa, is plenty of power outages and what have you. But just in case it resurrects, then you can see there's an email sent to the group, to the group that either there's a class, there's a link, there's all that. So yeah, I would rather, be cautious about it, but at the same time look at what else could it bring to the table that we can really work with. I tend to think it would be naive to imagine that because there are enough risks, then we run away from it. She's just talking about the algorithms, and I'm thinking at the end of the day, even if I say I'm going to use my thumb to be my code for my phone, there are times that thumb will be demanded whether I like it or not, and it will be pressed and everything is out there. I could also think about giving a my own password. But in the place of danger, that password could not work for me if I need rescue. If someone needs to call somebody who is close to me, they can't because the phone is locked. So it's a bunch of risk everywhere. But I think we try and see how, in terms of weighing and balancing what could work, but at the same time, of course, putting the cautions as well. Because yeah, there's two sides to every story, maybe more than two sides even.
I agree completely. I was gonna say, I was thinking of a thing in my head recently, to be woke, but with one eye open and one eye closed. Like at sometimes you need to know what's out there, but you also need to just overlook it for a second because you need to focus on the empowerment potential. You don't want to let it go. I mean, here we are, we're using Google, right? But we're using it to do something that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And then all the other tools don't do exactly what we want. So this is the right one for this particular purpose, and it's achieving this. Yeah, so I agree with you. I wonder if any of the other virtual folks have questions. Okay, Kim.
Yeah, my question is just about, are there any other topics that are sort of interest that people are talking about? What's the buzzword? I assume politics is going to come into the equation. So I know it's earlier in the conference as well, so I just want them to weigh in on what other topics are coming up.
Yeah, just from looking at the conference program, many of the presentations and panels have been about the election, about populism, about media coverage of politics, and also about how communities have been affected by like the rhetoric around all of these different contexts. So you can take a look at the program, which is online. And I think they're actually making a lot of the papers available for download also. So that's another good thing about this conference. They're trying to make it as accessible as possible for folks who can't come. So many of those papers are available.
I just attended one that was very interesting, civic engagement. That was, of course, because I have an inclination towards mobile phone. This guy was looking at mobile phone as a tool for civic engagement. And interesting how he brings it in. So I just want to agree with Anne that we have plenty of that happening at this conference. Yeah, so politics is so much around, and how we can use technology to facilitate or otherwise. And so, yeah, it's here.
I'm surprisingly really interested in the algorithms, and I noticed that there was a talk this morning about killer robots and AI, because there's actually numerous police forces that are already arming autonomous agents around the US. And of course, that's an extension about the conversation about drones and the way drones are mobilized internationally, but also more and more.
Oh my God, I remember Ruha Benjamin. I don't know if you guys know Ruha, but recently, I think it was actually at the American University in Cairo, she was talking about this, people talking about these kind of killer, I don't know, killer things without thinking about what, you know, who are you killing and why are you killing that person in the first place? And I thought she was talking about something theoretical, but clearly it's actually happening. I did not realize. Well, I mean, drones, obviously, yes, but the robots, like, they're using like a police person, right? Like a police officer, like on a face-to-face with an individual, rather than a drone that just bombs, which is not any better, really, but.
Well, I thought that's what happened in Dallas when they had a shooter at a public event. Do you guys remember that?
Yes, that was, I think, the first incident of a robot killing someone in a police encounter.
Right.
Do you want to share with us what you wanted to talk about? Oh, you did? Okay.
I just did, maybe just to add a little bit more. Besides talking about the WhatsApp, texting, and Facebook, and people beginning the groups that are specific. One of the things that I'll be really trying to push in is the idea that now in the academia, we are moving from teacher-centered to student-centered approaches. And so with the technology, it's giving us an avenue to make classes interactive. And so we are co-creators of content with our students. And so when you think about having the groups that are targeted, chances are that more power, so to speak, will be snatched away from the hands of the facilitator, and now it's going to be co-creation of content and interactive I didn't understand this bit, somebody can highlight, throw it back. So there's that interaction going on. And so because of the shift, the paradigm shift in how we do business in terms of lecture-student relationship, I think the technology is going to help some more. But there's something else that is being piloted in East Africa. It's called remote teaching, remote learning. The idea is that you have, the thinking behind it is that you can solve the problem of having so many students with different streams, and you have only one teacher. So if you have remote teaching and learning, you're positioned at one place. So you have a university that has several campuses. So if I have University A, which has campus C and D, then as a lecturer, I'm supposed to position myself in A and then have B and C strategic, and I have my class. Of course, that makes a lot of economic sense for the institution because one teacher, many students. But when you think about me as a lecturer, you're killing me. So, so ideally, there is also that challenge of the institution saying, yeah, we should do this now. There's a lot of hunger and thirst for knowledge, and you get a lot of people now making it to the universities. We have evening program. And so the institutions are thinking, when they have this, which is remote teaching and learning, they can solve the problem of the numbers, get more money. But I tend to think it's a power issue also, because then where do you put the lecturer? At what time do they have to, review all this? So there is that remote teaching and learning, actually calling it blended learning now. And then there is the other thing I'm talking about. Yeah.
It's only really blended for the instructor, right? Because you're the one who's dealing with online and face-to-face, but for the students, some of them are totally online and some of them are totally face-to-face.
Correct. And then the challenge also is that even in these, the sub-branches, you're going to have someone like a technician ready to, do things. Because if a student shoots a question there and needs to start some addressing quickly on face-to-face, it's not going to be you seated somewhere. It's going to be the technician or somebody, assistant in that class. So at the end of the day, you want to ask yourself, this assistant that is in that class, what qualifications do they have? What skills do they have? Can they address this? So it's more of institutional bosses doing their thing. Yeah.
It was that mentorship, right, that you would otherwise have as a teaching assistant.
Exactly.
And then you are reduced to human capital.
True. And then you go back to think about the cultural aspect, where we value, one-on-one kind of a thing. And then all of a sudden, there is that technology coming in between us. So ideally, especially for the old folks, in fact, part of the literature that we have is that they feel that this thing is so intrusive. When you begin to introduce, whether it is this remote or even the mobile learning, it's very intrusive because I'm having my private life, and then I have all these comments from others asking, what did the teacher say about this? Hey, we need all these papers by tomorrow morning or something. So yeah, there are those who are apprehensive about the technology. There are those who are embracing. There are those who are almost in a state of somnambulism. Yeah.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Rachel Schnepper. I'm at Grinnell College in rural Iowa for a brief period of time, longer, and then I will be moving to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where I'll be taking up the position of Director of Academic Technology there. And so I got my introduction in. I've been getting text messages from Maha that I should have introduced myself. So I've gotten that all out of the way right now. But I wanted to ask a question about that, where if there's a move towards more student-centric learning, then creating these technology foundational tracks, is this such a way that's going to be able to adapt to the student-centric learning, particularly in areas where if the technology, for example, is coming from like California and it's being used in India, for example, perhaps methods of teaching are very different there as well too, and student-centric in India is going to be different than student-centric in Silicon Valley is as well too.
Yeah. Wow. I think you just made your observation, which I agree. I totally agree. It's not one size fits all. So yes, it's going to be contextual. At the end of the day, we want to think about the context when this is happening. Okay, let me just jump in. It's not really so much in the mobile phone pedagogy, but part of my research when I was doing mine is that I noticed the mobile phone, the preference would be when someone would go to the shop to buy a mobile phone, it's not so much because they want to communicate, which was a shock to me because I'm thinking this is a technology for communicating, but ideally they would buy it for the spotlight. Okay, and the reason is they needed a flashlight because you see the toilets are detached from the main house, or they have the animals on the other side, and so on and so forth. So of course that context demand that we may not really go for sophisticated one. If I have a 1G that gives me a spotlight, I'm good to go. So similarly, we could also use the same academic also and say, really at the end of the day, we want to look at the context. Yes, it's a good technology, but how does it work for you? So yeah, it's a valid thought. Yeah, thanks.
Your turn.
One of the things I might draw your attention to, if you're not already familiar, is the project by FemTechNet, their distributed open collaborative course, which is trying to intervene in that MOOC, right, the massive open online courses, which is this like top-down, we have the expertise and we're going to distribute all of this education and learning to everyone as if you can just do that. And what they're trying to do is create teaching resources that can be used in any local instantiation and taught by people in that setting. So they can personalize it and make it local and make it relevant to the people who are there. So I'll talk about it briefly, but Anne Balsamo is also going to be on the closing plenary, so I imagine she'll also be discussing it as well. But it's another way to think about how we can leverage technologies, but it's not as, the technology itself isn't as important as the people, especially the people who are doing the learning, doing the teaching, and working in that space together. And that space can be digital or physical.
I think, you know, what helpful is if people know what to do if they wanted to join FemTechNet, or what are the different things you can do to participate. Because when Paula invited me, like, hey, you should join FemTechNet, I'm like, I've been interested in FemTechNet for such a long time, I just have no idea how to get in. And this happens with virtually connecting as well. People don't always know how to get in. And so I have that question for you, you probably know.
Yeah, so FemTechNet is, I think it can be really intimidating because it is such a huge network. So if you're on Facebook, the Facebook group is a great way to just meet some of those people. But it's probably not as active as a network through Facebook as the people who are actually coming to the subcommittee meetings, and a lot of that happens in Slack. So you can head to the FemTechNet website, which is femtechnet.org, and Misha, you've actually worked with some of the FemTechNet, producing the Center for Solutions in Online Violence. So we have a lot of resources available on femtechnet.org, and we've worked with a lot of folks in different areas to produce different kinds of resources. And if you are interested in any of the particular different subcommittees or projects, you can reach out to the folks there. We'll also be at the Allied Media Conference in Detroit this summer, in a couple weeks actually, and we're going to try to do another virtually connecting session there as well. And if you want, you can email me or tweet at me, and I'll get you in contact with folks as well.
Okay, let's plan that virtually connecting. I'm glad you just offered to do that right away, so that's great. I see Benjamin's writing a lot of stuff in the text, but I don't know if he wants to ask any of that out loud. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I was just sort of making some notes about different bits that popped out to me. I think I see it from a slightly different perspective because I'm working more with kids than with people who are getting closer to being adults. I find a lot of the interesting stuff is a lot of the technology they're drawn to, say like Snapchat and Instagram, they don't necessarily actually want to use that for school purposes because that's their social life. And a lot of the technology we assume they should be on, say like Twitter, because that's what adults might use academically, they have no interest in. And so I'm sort of interested in how those sort of dynamics play out. That's sort of some of the stuff that's going through my head as you're talking. Yeah, sorry, it's not really a question, sorry.
That is a good question, because I think a lot of educators are trying to think about where our students live online, and if we want to leverage that for their learning, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe they should have their own space. I don't know.
Yeah. It also brings the question of, even for adults, say social media etiquette, for example. What are you allowed to post? What are you allowed not to post? What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable? So ideally, there's also the question of throwing yourself in, and especially I keep referring to our work because ideally that's data anybody can go back to any time. And part of the things that I tell my students when they're online for whatever reason is that because these are like first year, second year graduates, at the end of the day, they're looking forward to finishing and starting to work or something. So if whatever it is that they post in there can come haunting them, then they better be careful. But because now, even the employers, once they have shortlisted you for the interview, they want to go through your social platform and find out what else have you been doing. And so I have a particular particular case where someone had scored so highly, everything was good, the CV was impressive. But when it got to the panel, it's like, so why should we employ someone of this who has issues with identity, because they went to the Facebook and they got everything. And these are the things that she used to do before now as a graduate student, but they could trace back. So yeah, it's good to have the technology, but don't be over mesmerized with it, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the more important things also is just to have our teach our students the skills to be able to interrogate the technologies that they're using, right? A lot of my students are using Snapchat and not reading the terms of service. So when I have them go back and write papers reading the terms of service, they're horrified about what they're handing over. That this isn't just something that'll disappear once they post it on Snapchat, right? But it's a neoliberal company and they keep this information and they have databases and servers with all of this information, and the students are not thinking about that. So just check whether or not we want to use those tools as tools for teaching is one thing, but also it's important for us to be teaching our students how to engage with those tools. That's also difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example. I think that a lot of people want to use Snapchat because they think everything disappears and they're like, it's less commitment or it's safer or something. But it's something I try to teach my students is about the racial and gender bias and assumptions in something like Facebook. And there's so much resistance from my students every time. I usually teach them this Dana Boyd essay, which is about
White flight.
White flight in networked publics, which I think is a pretty good essay. But I mean, I teach in a design program, and just so many of my students come in with the fully believing that Facebook is for everyone. Everyone uses Facebook. Everyone uses the internet, or Facebook is totally neutral. And when we talk about how it was designed for Ivy League college students at first, and therefore specifically designed initially mostly for rich white men, it just gets so much resistance from my students. They don't want to believe it. Yeah.
I'll make a comment on the use of Snapchat, Facebook, since I'm teaching journalism, well, like most of you probably, or some of you, I guess. Trying to get them to, like you say, move from using it socially to using it for a more journalistic purpose has been a bit of a challenge. I had to make a required assignment to do a Facebook Live this semester, and they were so reluctant to do it. And so then I had them do a bit of a reflection where they were like, only one of them said, I just don't get it. But the other said, I can see how this would be very meaningful in terms of using it for personal or for professional. But trying to get it right and things like that was very unique. And when we did a second one, the numbers were higher. And I think they liked this, I have an audience. So that was very interesting to follow. In terms of Snapchat, I really do believe that that's their social space. And unlike Twitter and Facebook, I mean, frankly speaking, I don't want to connect with them in that way on a larger scale, on an academic scale. So I see their interest in keeping it sort of social and not academic. But I definitely am a firm believer in using Twitter for all of these purposes, both socially and for course purposes too.
Also, I would add, I mean, one of our security tips in the Hold Your Boundaries project is to try to hack yourself, or at least Google yourself, and see how long it takes to find your home address. But of course, all these issues are really different for trans people and for undocumented people. I mean, I still Google myself and find things that make me feel really bad, and still am engaged in the process of trying to track down the right sysadmin from that image from 10 years ago to take down off the internet, and that's really unpleasant. But also, I mean, I've only been teaching for 2 years at UW, and I think when I came in, I just was like, I wanted to have a lot of assignments on social media and students doing a lot of work in public online, because that, you know, it often has them produce better work because they have an audience. But I mean, the reality is I have students that are undocumented. I have a lot of students that are under different kinds of threat, and they have like very real concerns about why they don't want their assignments to be online. So I've really pulled back from that. And also I find teaching graduate students, I often have grad students that find like making a website on WordPress or even on Tumblr to be an incredibly technically challenging thing. So I think there's like so many different layers of how or why my students are reluctant to do this kind of work, because you know, they come in with a specific skill set around writing or art, and oftentimes doing even an assignment that's like create 10 tweets that that reference interesting media objects or theorists or have like poetic things in them is still often really challenging for a lot of my students, even though there are things that are really simple for some of my students.
So what do you do? Do you just offer more support? I don't want to take up too much of your time. You guys have to leave. I have a feeling you have to leave soon. But do you usually just offer different supports for different people, or offer opportunities for people to opt out and do alternative things? Because I'm starting to think about that as well.
I mean, one thing I do is to talk about the privacy settings. So you know, they can create their tweets privately and just send me a screenshot. Or sometimes if I have a video assignment, I'll just have students, I mean, I know it degrees of privacy, of course, but if sometimes I have students that don't want to post things on YouTube, and I'm like, well, you can post it on Google Drive and send me a link that way. Yeah. And also just like having lab time where there's a lot of time for people to ask questions, because some people have a lot more questions than others about how to do technical tests. And there's never, for me, like, there's never like middle ground for me. There's always like somebody who has their own YouTube channel and like thousands of followers, and then somebody who is like, how do I create a YouTube account?
I was wondering if, because we've had a lot of students here that are very resistant to creating online profiles and engaging in an online environment for a variety of reasons as well too. And what I've tried to do for the professors that I work with who encounter this situation is that there's still a lot of value in, if not engaging and producing content yourself, then really carefully observing the other content that's being produced and created by other people as well too, and analyzing that and seeing what they're doing and how they're doing it and what effect that has. And I think that, you know, particularly when you see something like Instagram and you see like somebody having used, and I'm going to use this example and I apologize, but I think they're fascinating. If you look at the way the Kardashians have, you know, built this brand and this empire across Instagram and these other social media platforms, and for the record, Scholars Lab is analyzing it right now. So it has become a legitimate area of academic study. You can see that, like, you know, you are building a incredibly powerful online presence. and that it can be observed over a multi-year period through people like the Kardashians. And that sometimes even instead of asking the students to, you know, kind of like create their own Tumblr for a couple of weeks, it then becomes abandoned and part of the graveyard of dead websites, that they can see the more long-term effects as opposed to just creating it in the short term.
So should we transition to goodbyes?
Yes.
I promised Maha and Ken that we would show them the view outside our window.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Draw them now.
So it's ridiculous, and the sun is out now. Misha, would you like to
Oh,
be
sure.
honest?
Ah.
Can you see that?
Yes, I want to jump out of the window.
Wonderful.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I think we could all unmute now and say thank you all together. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And on Monday for our panel for the closing plenary. Yeah. Thank you, Misha. See you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We can stay on virtually for a few more minutes if Ken can stay.
Yeah,
you
for
guys-
virtual folks, we can stay.
Thank you, Misha, for letting us use your laptop too.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful. It was great.
Glad you could make him and Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right. Good night, Kim.
Hi, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you so much, Kim.
All right. Take care.
That's
Thanks
my
for jumping
first
in,
time.
Benjamin. I think
Yeah, thank you.
I think I sent you the wrong link or something. I don't know what I did.
Yeah, I have no idea. This is my first time doing anything like this. It was really interesting.
But I hope you miss more often.
I would love to.
It'd be great to get your students connecting with someone as well across the country.
Yeah.
I got a contact from someone in Winnipeg, and they wanted to talk about what it was like in Mexico and also Innovate. But
cool.
so I said, well, I'm in Mexico, so I can hook you up. And my son just sat right over there and talked to her class and somewhere in Winnipeg for the day. And it was like, oh, this is great. He's doing what like Maha and I do like all the time here with virtually connecting with other people. So getting kids talking to other kids across the planet is always fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that.
And then you don't live stream those though. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I
Right.
think like a sheltered space is kind of what they're after.
Exactly.
Sort of, yeah. It's interesting. Part of what was going through my head when they were talking about the Kardashians, I had read somewhere, I forget where now, about the idea of having your kids start to create a positive brand identity for themselves online, not in like a super sleek corporate sense, but as a way of controlling Google results about yourself. So that when people Google you, the first thing they will find is something like academic related to school. So if you sort of try to have a blog where you post things about your school academics, then that will sort of, in Google's page rank, jump above your Instagram or jump above your Facebook. And I think that's an interesting way to sort of give some kids some agency in the process. You know, sort of like how can you understand Google's algorithm and kind of game it to control your presentation.
And not just kids, faculty too, because I work with
Absolutely.
faculty about getting their stuff online. And I want them to find my blog and not ratemyprofessor.com.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
most of my colleagues, and I Google them, that's what comes up.
Yeah.
That's all there is about them. So
Yeah.
people need to realize you need to curate your identity, and you can't erase what you don't like, but you can put a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful message for kids.
That's a great idea. But I mean, I was feeling like Misha probably has a lot of that, a lot of the positive stuff that she wants to be found online. And she's saying she still does find the other stuff, and that's painful, I think.
Yeah.
For someone like
Yeah.
her
It
who's-
doesn't go away.
And we can't, as I mentioned in the sidebar chat, we can't sort of, I think, assume that everybody should be online. I think there's some limits to that. Even if it's kids, you know, where perhaps there's an estranged parent that they don't want seeing them online or something like that. I think there's tons and tons of issues for why they may not want to be represented.
Robin DeRosa said she had someone who was in the witness protection program. And so you don't want to even risk getting that person online or on the phone even, you know, you can't protect them with whatever level of privacy. But it's useful not to, I mean, I think, useful to think, to be open to those different possibilities, not be open for certain people when it doesn't make sense. And just to think about how, when you have 1 or 2 students of that kind in your class, not going to fully participate in whatever it is you're doing, or do you change your entire assignment? Or because you also don't want to point them out to other students that way. Like even the simple thing, like when I need to do something digital in my class, I don't know which students can bring a laptop or a phone or whatever. Most students have one, but if 1 or 2 don't, you don't want to embarrass them. And so either I pair them up sometimes, or I just get a bunch of extra tablets and say anyone can use them. I don't say who doesn't have a phone, come and get one. You know, I just put them there. But there are some things that are more complicated to solve than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I think I'll wrap up. It was great.
Thank
you. You owe me a message in Slack because you were talking to me about something, and we'll take that conversation offline later. But it was wonderful meeting you too, Benjamin.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you both.
I'm gonna go check out what you're working on, because it sounds really interesting. So I'll wrap up. Thanks for everyone who participated in Virtually Connecting from ICA 17, and I will hit the stop broadcast button now.